Welcome to Chabad Inspiration. In just a few hours, we will celebrate the great holiday, the Hasidic celebration of the freedom of the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who was liberated on this date in 1927, on the 12th day of Tammuz. It was his 47th birthday when he was notified in his exile city that he's free to go home, but he had to wait for the following day to receive the actual papers on the 13th day of Tammuz, 1927. And later on, the previous Rebbe declared this date in his writings in Igris Kodesh, which is a collection of his writings in volume 2. And he writes there, Moyed HaMoyadim, this is the holiday of holidays, because this is the date where Judaism triumphed over the powers of evil, and we are here today to tell the story. The previous Rebbe, as he writes, did not just represent himself. This was not a war against him. This was a war that the Russian communists, the Bolsheviks, the Yevsektia, which was the Jewish brigade, unfortunately, launched against the Jewish people, against 3,300 years of the bright, shining candle of Judaism. And unfortunately, they got pretty close to extinguishing this great light in the former Soviet Union, where at the time, at least a majority of the Jewish people lived. Millions of Jews lived in the former Soviet Union. Throughout the 1920s, synagogues were closed. Kosher butchers were closed. Any institution that was connected in any way to Judaism was closed. The local mikvahs were closed. Even the cheders where little Jewish children went to study and learn the Aleph Beis, even that was a threat to the Russians, to the communists, to the Bolsheviks, because they knew that if they give a Jewish child a chance to study the Aleph Beis, then the candle has been lit again for yet another generation. And that child will grow up to be the proud parent of many other Jewish children, and so on and so forth. And that threatened the greatest of empires in that part of the world, the former Soviet Union. It was on Purim Katan, a month before the proper Purim of 1927, when the previous Rebbe was on a visit to Moscow. And they were preparing for a Farbrengen Archipovas Street in the Lubavitch shul. And he was notified that there will be spies here tonight, and your coming to this Farbrengen is very dangerous, and he was advised to leave the city for his own safety. He was advised by a Jewish activist who cared deeply for his well-being. But the previous Rebbe refused and chose self-sacrifice, Mesiras Nefesh, and continued on with the scheduled Farbrengen. And at that very Farbrengen, in the presence of the spies of the communists, the previous Rebbe declared that we must make sure that every Jewish child receives a Jewish education. And he strengthened the spirits of the Jewish people that were there. And he asked them to go out and share that message with our fellow brothers and sisters throughout the land of the former Soviet Union. Unfortunately, that night did not go unnoticed. And 4 months later, on the 15th day of Sivan, when he was sitting at his home in Leningrad, he was arrested. They took him to the famous or infamous jail Shpalerka, a jail which, when I was there in 1990, and we walked by that street, and we stood in front of that building, local Jews told us they're still afraid to even walk on that street, because for so many decades that street symbolized death. And they still had the fear of going even close to that building in the 1990s. And in that building, in section 6, in cell number 160, the previous Rebbe was incarcerated. And they tried to break his morale and his spirit. They were not successful. They tried to extract from him, under severe interrogation, the names of all the Hasidim that were cooperating and running this network underground, but he would not disclose it. Until one of them said to him in Yiddish, "You see this gun, this toy? This has made many stubborn people speak." To which the previous Rebbe responded immediately, "This toy which you speak of only scares individuals who have many gods, but only one life, one world. But I have only one God and two worlds, and your toy doesn't scare me." Previous Rebbe fearlessly stated, the Jewish people know as a reality there is only one God of Israel, one creator of the universe. There's only one truth and one purpose of life. And that purpose of life will not be altered and will not be defeated by the threat of a bullet. It is only when you have many gods and you worship whatever gives you pleasure, and you only believe you have one shot at it, one life to live, and there's nothing before and nothing after. There is no bright future. There's no world to come. There's no world of Mashiach. There's nothing. Where you sell yourself and you indulge in everything to the point where you begin to even oppress others and even murder innocent men, women, and children as they have done. The previous Rebbe, during that trip, when he went to Moscow, and then when he came back to Leningrad, and he knew the danger. Others recommended for a few months we should, so to speak, keep quiet, stay low. But the previous Rebbe went out and encouraged everybody. And when finally they arrested him, and after a miracle where his death sentence was commuted for exile, and he was offered to leave before Shabbos, to leave the dangers of that infamous jail. Previous Rebbe said, when does the train leave and when does it arrive? And it involved desecrating the Shabbos. It would be traveling on Shabbos. The previous Rebbe said no. He is willing to endanger his life and staying in that jail even longer. And no one can ever know what can happen when you stay in that jail longer. They can change their minds. Lots of things can happen. The previous Rebbe describes in his writings how he heard overnight the screams of dying people and the sounds of bullets, how the innocent were gunned down in the backyard of this prison. So you can imagine staying in such a prison even one more minute was absolute danger. The previous Rebbe refused to violate the Shabbos of Chilul Shabbos and chose to stay till Sunday morning. And on Sunday, they gave him a few hours to go home to say goodbye to his family before he leaves for 3 years to exile in the city of Kostroma. And standing at the train station in the city of Leningrad on the 3rd day of Tammuz, 1927, when he just came out of jail and he's on his way to exile for the crime of spreading Yiddishkeit, of spreading Judaism. The previous Rebbe got up and made a speech, so to speak, to all those who came to say goodbye and wish him well on his years of exile in Kostroma. And amongst his words he said, "This everybody in the world must know. It is only our physical bodies that God allowed the anti-Semites and the nations of the world to rule us. But our souls and our neshama were never given over to the control of these hateful people and individuals who are looking to oppress us. And therefore we must know, nobody will be able to stop us." These are words that the previous Rebbe said while the police officers were watching as he was going from jail and going on to the train. Words that could have cost, God forbid, you don't want to even think. But the previous Rebbe taught us something. When you believe in something, and you know it's the truth, not just you believe in it because you convinced yourself, but you know it's the emes, it's the truth, and you represent something, nothing can scare you, and you always have the strength and the inspiration to stand up with courage and to say the things the way they are and not to be afraid and not to be intimidated. One of the things that the previous Rebbe said, when he came out from jail, he wrote a letter a year later, Because after he was liberated on the 12th day of Tammuz, and he was notified, you're going to be freed, but tomorrow the papers will be given to you. So he was notified on his 47th birthday on Yud Beis Tamuz in the city of Kostroma that he's free, but only on the 13th day did he receive the actual papers. So Hasidim celebrate Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, the 12th and the 13th day of the month of Tammuz, which incidentally is just a few days before the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, which is only 3 weeks before the destruction of the temple, which we fast on Tisha B'Av. This month has been transformed into a holiday month. In addition to all of the pain, we all of a sudden have now the light to see where we are heading, to a world of peace and harmony with the coming of Mashiach. And the previous Rebbe had to leave the country because it was too dangerous for him to continue staying in the Soviet Union. So he left to the country of Riga. And there, from Riga, he wrote a letter on the 15th day of Sivan, 1928. Exactly a year to the day from when he was incarcerated and arrested in his home at the early hours of the morning. And he wrote to Hasidim all over Russia that although unfortunately I cannot be with you physically, we are united as one in spirit. I am with you. And he wrote, this is not a holiday just for me, that I was liberated, but every single one of the Jewish people, including those Asher B'Shem Yisrael Yechuna, which means an individual who only carries the name Jew. And as the Rebbe explains it, it's a Jew that doesn't even walk around as a Jew. He's only identified by others and they say, oh, he's Jewish. But you wouldn't know it from his practice. But the Jewish people represent something. It's not just our physical body, it's what you represent. And what you represent was under attack. And that is what was celebrated and freed and liberated on this great holiday. So as on this great holiday, we see that when you stand up strong and you're not afraid and you're not intimidated, then God brings miracles and we survive and we thrive. The previous Rebbe writes that Mesiras Nefesh, which means in Hebrew self-sacrifice, in the United States is going to be a very different type. Thank God the United States Constitution protects us and we are free to practice our heritage, our tradition, our Judaism freely. But Mesiras Nefesh also means Mesiras Haratzin, giving over your will, self-sacrificing our wills and desires. And that, said the previous Rebbe, may even be harder than the self-sacrifice of our bodies. Because when a person really wants something and you're free to choose it, it's not easy to get a hold of yourself and say, no, I will not do that. I will do the right thing. I will be a proud Jew and continue Jewish heritage, even in a land where I'm free to choose whatever I want. And as we see today, unfortunately, many who have chosen that path of assimilation. But on this great holiday, it gives us strength to know that it is in our hands to light that candle. We are the ones that are holding the match. We are the ones in this generation whom God is entrusting to carry the banner of the Jewish people, for which the previous Rebbe nearly gave his life quite literally. And so many Hasidim have passed away, died, and were murdered as a result of this. My great-grandfather, the one that I'm named for, sat 22 years behind Russian jails, Russian bars, for the crime of being a Schneerson agent. And so did countless other Hasidim in so many different families, who dedicated their lives so that you and I can be here today and proudly say, in a free land, I am proud to be a Jew. So L'chaim, this holy day has the powers of amazing blessings. And therefore, as Hasidim always say, by a Farbrengen, you can achieve even what the angel Michal, Malach Michal in heaven cannot achieve. So may it be a good time, a time of peace and harmony. May we bring the light of purpose and meaning to a generation who seems not to be able to find their footing, not to be able to understand that their life is meaningful, not because of your activism, not what you represent politically, not what party you represent, but rather because our loving Father in heaven loves every single one of us as his only child. and every single individual's actions and life, every good deed that we do, every mitzvah that we do, lights another candle. When you have a focused purpose, then you don't have a vacuum. And you don't have to go to anarchy, to criminal activity, but on the contrary, you can live a life of purpose and meaning in harmony with all of humanity, regardless of race, color, or creed, because we all understand that Hashem, the creator of the universe, is here for us and loves us and is waiting for the good deed that we are doing. And ultimately, our good deeds, as the previous Rebbe said already in the 1940s, la'alter l'tshuva, la'alter l'geula, which means the moment we will do teshuva, immediately the redemption of Mashiach will come, a time of peace and harmony. The Rebbe tells us that that day is already imminently going to happen. By increasing acts of goodness and kindness, we will bring that great day, the cure that the whole world is looking for today, whether we know it by its name or not. But everybody's looking for brotherhood, for peace, for love, for bringing this world back to a sense of normalcy, to the recognition of man is created in the image of his creator. That great day will all happen, as Maimonides says, when the world will be in a world of state of peace, and God will remove all the sickness of the world with the coming of we want Mashiach now. L'chaim.